I would like for you to stop front squatting.
We're headed back to the Iron Graveyard today.
Dr. Mike.
You either die a hero,
Back up. Stop front squat.
or you live long enough to see yourself become the villain.
What's up, guys? Enkiri here, and today we're going to respond to Dr. Mike Israetel, the newly crowned YouTube fitness clickbait queen. And I'm going to tell you why, contrary to what the good doctor thinks, you should be incorporating the front squat in your training. Myself, I've been an avid front squatter going on somewhere about 15 years or so now. I've hit bests of 430 pounds in knee sleeves, 455 in knee wraps. I've done 405 zombie style, 350 ATG Anderson style from the bottom up. I've even done a Widowmaker set of 250 for 20 reps, and I have zombie front squatted 275 pounds for 15 reps. It's one of my favorite exercises. I did all of these feats at body weights between 155 and 170 pounds over the years. And over those years, I have talked at length about the vast benefits of front squats and the myriad of training goals that they support. And you will simply never convince me that content like Dr. Mike's video here has any value whatsoever beyond the clicks it garners his channel. Over 1 million followers, the vast majority of whom are going to be noobs by default and don't need much convincing to eliminate something like this from their program or to simply never even give it a shot at all, especially when that anti-front squat sentiment, heavy anti-front squat sentiment, is coming from such an intelligent and authoritative figurehead as Dr. Mike. And that's really a shame, because if those people heed Mike's advice here, not only will they be missing out on potential strength and muscle gains in the lower body, but they will also be dismissing a triple whammy exercise, something that kills multiple birds with one stone. It accomplishes the act of building strength and size in the legs while also building immense upper back strength and encouraging ample degrees of mobility spread across several of the more important joints of the body. Further, they will also be missing out on a potential gateway exercise, one that could have garnered interest in other endeavors like Olympic weightlifting or potentially even strongman. But these people are by and large going to be rank novices. So how could they know any of this? They haven't experienced any of it for themselves yet. And all Mike's video is going to do is encourage them to never experience any of it, simply because he believes that this movement is not great for quad hypertrophy, the most myopic of viewpoints, and which honestly is the fucking steroids talking. If you ask me, you won't find a natural lifter with an impressive front squat who lacks quad size. I would consider myself one of those people, and I think that there are many other people like me. Impressive front squat, natural lifter, no quads, doesn't fucking exist. But front squats are hard. Yeah, so is building big legs as a natural lifter. But once you have altered and enhanced your physiology, you no longer have to play by the same rules, right? So I find it irritating when people in that league forget that they are playing by a different set of rules and they act like their rules still somehow apply to us, or they still somehow know better for the people who aren't playing by those sets of rules, by their set of rules. This video was a miss. It was clickbait cope from someone who seems to only have the ability to view weight training through the singular context of hypertrophy, and really hypertrophy biased towards the enhanced lifter, the way I see it. He is so concerned about how to best focus on and emphasize particular muscles that he entirely lacks the ability to see the generalized value of particular patterns of movement. Anyway, I'm getting a little heated, and we haven't even gotten started yet, so let's start running through some of Mike's major points in his video so that we can rebut them in context.
Front squatting is an excellent exercise for the sport of weightlifting.
Yes, and dogs fart, but some things are so painfully obvious that they don't really need to be stated at all, let alone detailed with a 186-word explanation. This whole initial segment sounded to me like somebody trying to give you a freebie, essentially conceding something uncontested and basically irrelevant in the debate in order to gain brownie points and make you feel they aren't as biased as they are because they know they're about to cope really hard for the next 9 minutes to convince you to share in these same biases that they're trying very hard to hide.
However, if you are a strongman competitor, powerlifter, bodybuilder, physique athlete of any kind, and especially recreational person just trying to get bigger and stronger, the front squat suffers, this is point number 2, from some pretty substantial downsides.
So here's where everyone who said Mike is talking purely from a hypertrophy perspective can eat their words. And I saw permutations of that comment 1,000 different times. Obviously, it's not what he's talking about. We are a minute and a half into his video, and he's already argued that strength athletes should not be doing front squats, excluding Olympic lifters, but whatever. They're their own breed of strength athlete anyway. And I find it incredibly interesting, baffling, perplexing, an almost shocking elementary level mistake that he lumped strongman competitors into this category because, as best as I can tell, every single downside that he's about to list for the front squat is actually an upside for somebody who competes in strongman. The front squat is going to help you build bigger, stronger legs, a stronger, more stable upper back. It's going to teach you how to brace well and maintain optimal position as you drive objects off of your shoulders. Last time I checked, putting things overhead, especially with the involvement of leg drive, typically when done off the front of the shoulders, is a pretty big part of strongman competition. Now, I'm not a strongman competitor myself, but I am an avid enjoyer of push presses and jerks. And I will tell you the best assistance exercise that you can do for the push press. It's not the strict press, but rather it is the front squat. It bolsters leg drive and upper back strength, and it helps you put a shitload more weight overhead. And I don't think that any strongman competitor worth his salt would argue against that point. And that's not even the whole of it. The upper back strength, the ability to forcefully extend the thoracic muscles is going to prove immensely beneficial for a variety of loaded carries, as well as things like stone loading. Think about how you reach down and you pick up a stone. So the fact that Mike even allowed the word strongman to fall out of his lips, that was a pretty massive faux pas, and I don't even understand it. It makes you sound like a newbie, or I guess somebody who's just kind of massively overstepping their knowledge base in this particular regard. But really, the same deal goes for including powerlifting on this list. It's another baffling inclusion. I will go on the record as categorically stating that my legs would not be half as big or half as strong as they are if I did not learn to love front squats. I'm sure that many of my natty brothers will back me up on that point. My max back squat would not have approached the realms that it did if I didn't learn to love front squats. Part of that has to do with rectifying weaknesses, right? Teaching me to stay on my quads better, to stay more upright, to try not to run onto the hips, to not collapse through the upper back under load, and just in general, really learning to master more of a high bar emphasis in my back squats, which is a squat style that I am better suited for based on my build as compared to a low bar style where the hip drive and large degrees of torso lean are going to be more rewarded. But potentially even more important than all of this is the simple interplay between squat variations, using variety and slight changes in stimulus on a similar motor pattern to break through training plateaus. I've experienced this for myself multiple times, where the front squat was the game changer that pushed my back squat to the next level. In many of my clients, I've also witnessed massive improvements in the squat pattern in general when we start to emphasize front squats more. That transfers over, and they're then able to execute the back squat more efficiently and more effectively and make better gains because of it. And of course, I'm not saying that every power lifter will benefit from front squats so immensely as I have or some of my clients have. But for the ones who don't see a direct transfer from the front squat into the back squat, it isn't even because of the reasons that Mike states in his video. The stability argument has nothing to do with it. The real reason is simply because the muscular emphasis of front squats is the motherfucking knees, i.e. the quads. But many powerlifters squat with a very low bar style, and the emphasis there is not the knees, it is the hips. So that carryover just doesn't necessarily exist very well there all of the time. But if anything, this makes Mike's entire argument in his video almost contradictory, because just a couple days after releasing it, he released another video arguing that low bar squats are not a good way to build the legs. Okay, so low bar squats aren't a good way to build legs because they emphasize the hips, right? Fine, I'll give you that. So then it would stand to reason that front squats often don't carry over well into back squats because they emphasize the quads. A low bar squat is sort of the opposite of a front squat on the squatting continuum. So if you acknowledge that low bar squats emphasize the hips at the expense of the knees, the logic sort of follows congruently that front squats emphasize the knees instead of the hips. Anyway, I could go on and on and on this point for the rest of the freaking video, but we're 90 seconds into Mike's video, so I need to move on to the next point.
The front squat is not as stable as what's called the back squat to weightlifters, which is the high bar squat to everybody else. Your elbows will tend to fall down. You'll tend to slip and not be able to hold the bar. If you push the bar too far back, you start to choke yourself. That lower stability is a problem because stability is the foundation of good technique and force production.
This is not even a legitimate argument, in my opinion. He's essentially arguing that you can't push your front squats very hard, because if you do, then your torso will lean forward and you'll lose the bar, or you'll have to stop set, or whatever the problem is. But that happens because the hips pop up and the torso leans forward, right? I've talked about this in the past. The torso leaning forward is simply indicative of you removing the stress from your quads, not being able to stay on the quads, which is a response to quads that were not strong enough to handle the task they were being called on to perform. So the body is trying to escape that task by getting off the knees and getting the hips more involved. But whether you are front squatting or high bar squatting, the hips shooting up, it's the same thing. It doesn't really matter. If the hips shoot up during a front squat, a high bar squat, whatever it is, and you start performing a squat morning, it's simply an example of bad form regardless. The only difference is that the back squat allows you to get away with it and the front squat doesn't. That does not mean you're taxing your quads to a greater extent on the back squat. It just means you're turning your back squats into a lower back and glute exercise instead, which last I checked, that didn't really jibe with Mike's whole training philosophy to begin with. So I'm not really sure why he's using that particular rationale to discourage one movement while encouraging another. Look, I know he's making this whole thing kind of sound like rocket science, but it's really not that hard to get good at front squats. I've taken many a front squat hater and turned them into a front squat lover. And it's actually a very simple process. Keep doing your back squats, add some light front squats in on a separate day, film yourself doing them, and focus on keeping the elbows tall and the torso upright. If you start at an appropriate level, key point there, and you build yourself up gradually, then this black magic event happens where your quads get bigger and stronger, and you become a better squatter in general, regardless of the variation that you're doing.
Typically, when I see people doing front squats in a recreational setting, their stability looks pretty compromised, such that if they push really hard into the bar, it'll fall off of them. Thus, they don't push really hard into the bar.
Typically, when I see people bowling recreationally at the bowling alley, they have really poor form. They have absolutely no idea what they're doing, and they throw the ball into the gutter way more than they should be. So I guess next time what I'm going to do is I will go over there. I'll tell them that they should all probably just go home and never bowl again. Or, maybe we get better at things by practicing them. If the next Pocket Hercules is watching your video right now, Mike, he might never come to be, because he'll think to himself, there's no point in trying to acquire that new skill. It sounds like a lot of work. And I genuinely don't understand circular logic like this. We shouldn't do things that require skill because we aren't skilled enough at them right now in the way that people that are skilled at them are skilled at them. Like, duh, how the heck do you think that skilled people got skilled in the first place? They sucked, they practiced, and they got better over time. And this holds true for any sport, game, activity, or hobby on the freaking planet.
Because they're doing that, they're reducing how much neural drive is being sent to the muscles of the legs. The potential for hypertrophy and strength increase of the muscles of the legs declines relative to a high bar back squat, for example.
This same argument would be true for any free weight movement. If we follow Mike's logic to the end of the line here, then what we should end up at is we should all just be doing hack squats and leg presses, or better yet, leg extensions only to train our quads, because we can't focus all of our neural drive into the legs during those pesky free weight movements and their stability demands. You know, we have to focus so much on not falling on our ass that we simply cannot possibly be working our legs hard at all. It's just very peculiar to me that he seems to think that front squats require so much more skill than back squats. If you took a novice lifter and you had them do both, they would both improve at the same rate, and they would both allow you to work your legs very hard, and they would both feed off of and complement each other during that process. But the same problems that Mike seems to think plague the front squat exist on the back squat all the same in novice trainees. And how do they overcome it? They overcome it by practicing the skill of squatting with a bar on their back. If they were to also practice the skill of squatting with a bar on the front of their shoulders, they would overcome those minor issues all the same.
Problem 2 is more chance for shoulder discomfort. Front squats can needlessly stress the shoulder joint, and you're just trying to train your legs hard, so the buy-in is very high. If we just do back squats, are we avoiding this even low probability mess of shoulder stuff that we get into? If someone's like, hey, my shoulders are killing me with high bar back squats, you're gonna be like, what the fuck are you doing with your squats? Are you like shoulder pressing it and keeping it in midair? You know, you can put it down on your neck. So it's just a matter of trade-offs, and that more shoulder discomfort is absolutely a feature of front squatting.
This is an odd one to me. I have never experienced shoulder joint pain during a front squat. I am unsure of the mechanism by which this would even occur, considering the fact that the shoulder joints aren't supporting the weight at all in any way, shape, or form during a properly performed front squat. They're not really doing anything at all. The bar essentially rests behind the shoulder joint on the big pad of meat that forms between the delts and the traps. It's called the shoulder shelf. You don't need to hold the bar with your hands at all during a front squat. You can just do this and the bar will rest nicely here. And the stress on the shoulder joint is minimal to non-existent. The only stress that's actually present is the blunt force from the bar bearing down on the muscles. But that is not joint stress, and that shouldn't beat up the shoulder joint in any sort of way. Not like pressing a bar or anything like that, or any kind of way that impacts other training or other activities. And really, I can't recall a single complaint of this sort in any client that I have ever coached. A very common weight room trope, however, and one that will apparently come as a shock to Mike, is that supporting the bar on the back of the shoulders is very uncomfortable for certain people on those shoulder joints, to the extent that certain people, usually bigger guys or immobile guys or guys who love the bench press, will take a very wide collar-to-collar grip on the bar, sometimes even going as far out as gripping the plates in order to try to alleviate that stress on their tight, immobile, and probably painful shoulders from having the weight sitting back there. I know I've seen footage of Mike himself holding a bar on his back with a very wide grip while squatting, which to me is indicative of a lack of shoulder mobility or somebody who ran into shoulder discomfort with a narrower and more stable grip. So it's somewhat surprising to hear him say all of this about the front squat, but then act like the back squat doesn't have any issues at all on the shoulders, when really the issue is inverted. Nonetheless, properly performed front squats don't stress the shoulder joints, and I honestly don't know what you're talking about.
The rack position tends to slip down and forward and out, no matter how you hold it. And the cross rack is even harder to hold, which means that you spend a lot of bandwidth trying to maintain the rack position. Most of my cues end up being like elbows up, elbows up, elbows up, because as you push out hard from the bottom of the front squat, your elbows tend to come down. That's just bandwidth, both physical and mental, that you're spending thinking about the technique. When you're squatting with a high bar, as long as you keep your chest up, the movement fixes itself. Keeping the position and the elbows and hands in the right place, it's like half the battle. That is bandwidth, physical and mental, that goes into that and is taken away from training your quads hard, which is the whole point of the exercise.
Another miss, and again, we could make the same argument about any free weight exercise in existence. You either have to apply the logic or not apply it at all. It can't be some weird middle ground where shit doesn't really make sense. Look, I'm using so much bandwidth here, trying not to make the weight force me to suck my own dick on these good mornings, that I'm not working my hamstrings or glutes or lower back at all. Like, dude, every free weight movement has constraints. In a Romanian deadlift or a good morning, we have to use bandwidth to make sure that we keep the back in an extended position. In a high bar squat, we have to use bandwidth to make sure we don't just let the hips fly up and turn the movement into a good morning, although maybe that's not a concern for Dr. Mike. In an overhead press, we have to make sure we drive the bar up and back so that we don't let it pull forward and run away from us. In a push-up, we have to make sure that the hips don't sag down and tax the lower back and take the abs out of the movement. In a chin-up or a dip, we have to make sure we don't let the lower body start swinging all over the darn place like we're a freaking monkey hanging from a tree. And in a front squat, we have to use bandwidth to make sure we don't allow the upper back to collapse. Great! That means the upper back is getting strong while the legs get strong. Where I'm sitting, this is called a double whammy, aka a motherfucking win. It's not a bad thing. It's a good thing because it kills two birds with one stone and it makes you more resilient overall. But again, this is the problem when you become so obsessed with muscles over movements. You lose sight of the bigger picture.
Training your quads hard, which is the whole point of the exercise.
There's a time and a place to be obsessed with whether you're isolating and trashing the target muscle, but it's not during a big compound movement like a front squat or a high bar squat. Those are your bread and butter. And as long as you cue in a way that works for you and allows you to navigate the movement pattern efficiently and effectively, then you're working the prime movers effectively, regardless of what Mike thinks. But if we keep following the logic that Mike employs in this video to its bitter end, then there's no reason for us to ever do anything besides leg extensions, leg curls, machine lateral raises, etc., etc. Heavily isolated movements that allow us to focus all of our attention on the target muscle without any loss of bandwidth.
Lastly, especially for higher reps, especially in the front squat, as you get strong, you tend to experience lung compression where the bar hits and it just caves your ribs in. With a high bar squat, it's natural just to lean back. With a front squat, it levers you down and it can make it difficult for you to take in big breaths, especially if you have a belt on. You get into this capacity where you're trying to breathe in a lot, but the shit is physically compressing you and you're like, God damn it.
High rep front squats. I've done 250 for 20, 225 for 21 or 22, something like that. 275 for 15 on the zombie squat. I have also, on the back squat, I've done 315 for 22, 335 for 20, and 350 for 16. And I'll tell you, comparing apples to apples, those back squat sets were way more uncomfortable during the set, way harder to get through, and they impeded my breathing to a much greater extent. Take it for what it's worth. It's an anecdote, sure as the sun is yellow, but to me, the longer I watch this video and I listen to these arguments, the more I just hear somebody who's not experienced with front squats at all talking shit about them for some reason. And that may be wrong. I have no idea what he's front squatted or how much work he's potentially put into the exercise. But what I'm saying is that with the arguments that I'm hearing in this video, if I didn't know who they were coming from, I would literally tell you dead ass, this guy's never done a fucking front squat in his life and he simply doesn't know what he's talking about. I'm just saying. But I don't really know how he can sit there with a straight face and claim that compression on the front of the shoulders with less weight impedes breathing more than compression on the back of the shoulders with more weight. At best, they impede your breathing about the same. At worst, the back squat impedes it more.
All of these downsides, in my view, on average, make front squatting relatively inferior to high bar squatting for both general strength development and general muscle growth and hypertrophy development. If you really want to do front squats and you have 3 or 4 other great quadriceps variants, you want to use front squats. Take a look at these downsides that I've listed, the 4 downsides, and think about, is it still worth it? If it is, try it. And if the downsides show up in the first month or 2 of you doing it, just be like, man, fuck this.
Or maybe don't do that. Maybe actually give a movement an earnest attempt at mastery before you decide it's not worth it for you. Nobody masters any form of squatting in a month. Nobody masters the fucking bench press in a month. Do you know how many great movements and gains that I would have lost out on over the years if I gave up on everything that was hard or uncomfortable or didn't quite feel right in the first 4 weeks of experimenting with it? That is a piss drop in the bucket. If that's how I played the game, I would be fucking nothing. I'd be nobody. I'd be some dude on here with a 225-pound squat, tiny legs, and no gains to speak of, talking about weight training, and not a single soul would listen to what I had to say, and for good fucking reason. You learn almost nothing nuanced about an exercise in 4 weeks, which for most people consists of a mere 4 exposures. That is not an earnest go. That is not the old college try. That is barely even good enough for government work, and it's not good enough for government work. Next time you're wondering about this topic, pick a lifter. Any lifter who you like, your favorite guy that you watch on social media. Go find their content where they talk about one of their pet exercises and then listen to what that guy has to say about that movement. Because chances are that guy has spent hundreds of hours performing that movement. He's done thousands of reps in the gym and many more thousands of reps after that in his mind, all on the same movement. That guy has lost sleep thinking about that movement. Listen to what that guy has to say about that exercise. Observe the nuance, the tiny technical details that you've never heard anyone else talk about. That's the kind of insight that can only be gleaned through real first-hand experience, earnest first-hand experience, not 4 freaking exposures. That's the kind of insight that few people obtain, and that is the kind of insight that cannot be replaced with books or studies or even training other people. You can only get it from yourself. It is certainly not the kind of insight that one can even remotely come close to replicating in 4 fucking weeks, okay?
Isn't good for reps because it fucking compresses my breathing. It's not good for max weight because it's not sufficiently stable for me and I end up just worrying about my rack position. And if it's really heavy, my shoulder discomfort is like pretty painful and pretty annoying. That's a lot of downsides. So just consider these downsides.
Anyway, that pretty much covers the meat of Mike's video. Frankly, in case you couldn't already tell, I didn't like it and it rubbed me the wrong way. It really felt out of bounds to me. The more I heard him talk, the more I began to wonder, has Mike done a front squat in the last 10 years? Has Mike done more than 100 reps of front squats in his entire life? And again, I have no idea, but the words coming out of his mouth really sounded the exact same to me as people who have no experience whatsoever with the front squat talking about the front squat. And I just think that that's a little bit whack. I've given too many people a complete 180 on their perception of this exercise to hear it talked about as if it carries so little value in the grand scheme of things. And the guy who's so respected as an intelligent authority figure and who's supposed to be such a nuanced thinker, speaking so dogmatically on realms he obviously doesn't have much experience in, is frustrating to say the least. To me, Mike's video served only to add fuel to the fire of the lame-ass biomechanics gurus and the optimal movement proponents. The logic being employed in it is exactly the same as what I've heard from them. He just never quite carries it all the way to its extreme. But it sort of honestly feels like he's been heading in that direction lately anyway. And videos like the one in question here are not a net positive to the community, in my opinion. Maybe that's a little bit harsh, but that's really the way I see it. They serve only to discourage where encouragement was what was needed. All he really said here was, if you don't like your vegetables, you shouldn't eat your vegetables anymore. Well, I have to wonder how many new lifters now are going to stop eating their veggies after seeing this video, Mike. You don't have to tell people not to eat vegetables. You should simply encourage them to do so where it's appropriate. And it's really the same thing with this. And look, man, I'm not the arbiter of fitness. If you're a skinny weakling with chicken legs and a weak upper back, then don't front squat. If you're happy, you're happy. If you're a hypertrophy enthusiast and you're happy being an immobile, dysfunctional sack of meat, then don't front squat. Again, that is your prerogative. I'm not going to make you do it, and no one has a gun to your head. But I am going to continue to extol the vast myriad of benefits that can be obtained by such a simple and accessible movement when you stop viewing the endeavor of weight training through the singular and myopic lens of muscular hypertrophy as the end-all be-all of everything. And even then, if you are a hypertrophy enthusiast and you're a natty, your legs will be bigger in 5 years if you learn to love front squats than if you skirt out of them, as Mike is encouraging you to do in this video. Anyway, that's all I got for today, guys. Please remember to smash the like button before you go. Leave us a love in the comments down below. Check out EnkiriEliteFitness.com for online coaching and training programs. And keep training hard. I will catch you guys next time.